All right, everybody, let's get started this morning. Do I have any volunteers to read? Any readers? No? I need a couple more volunteers to read. You got Numbers 22, 1 through 12. Numbers 22, 1 through 12. Any other volunteers to read? No? Randy? Miss Marilyn, I know you will read. Numbers 23, 7 through 11. That's Miss Marilyn. Numbers 23, 7 through 11. Randy, Numbers 24, 1 through 10. Numbers 24, 1 through 10. We've got one more. Anyone? One more reading? No? 2 Samuel 8? No? Neil? 2 Samuel 8, 1 through 15. You guys are a lively group this morning. All right. Let's go ahead and get started and open up with a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for this day to gather in fellowship as your people. Lord, to study your word, to hear your word preached, to fellowship, to sing praises to you. Lord, we pray that even now you would be preparing our hearts for the worship service. Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you that it is true. Lord, thank you that it's simple to understand. The gospel is simple to understand, but Lord, thank you that it's also deep and complex. Lord, that there's just beauty in it, the way that you have written it, the way that you have orchestrated redemption throughout history, Lord. Thank you for letting us see that. We praise you for it. Be with us now. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. We're going to be in Numbers 24 today. Numbers 24. We're continuing our study of the Messiah in the Old Testament, and we've been looking specifically at direct prophecies of the Messiah. Now, this isn't the only way we see Jesus in the Old Testament, as we mentioned in our introduction to the study, but direct prophecies is what we are focusing on right now. We plan to cover some types and shadows, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, but today we're going to consider a messianic text in Numbers. So we jumped from Genesis to Numbers. So let's set the stage and get an understanding of where we are in the storyline. So we kind of skipped two books, Exodus and Leviticus. And that's not because, again, that we can't see Christ in those books at all, but we don't see a direct messianic prophecy about Jesus or direct messianic text in Exodus or Leviticus. So that's why we're skipping over those. We hopefully will revisit those here in the next couple weeks. So Genesis has the beginnings of the people of Israel. We saw that. The seed of the woman, we saw this family line. We see them wind up going to Egypt to be delivered from a severe famine that's throughout all of the land, the Middle East. And we know that's accomplished through Joseph's rise to power, right? We talked about that. And the Israelites, after this, we see that Jacob dies, and the Israelites are living in Egypt. They're living in Egypt peaceably. But we're told that they continue to grow in number. I mean, they get to be this very large people group within Egypt. And it causes the Egyptians alarm. They're concerned. We have this people group. It's not us. They're huge. What if they rebel against us in our country here? So they basically make them slaves. They put them to forced labor, and they wind up building all these various cities and these other building projects for the Pharaoh. This is obviously after Joseph has passed away, and that Pharaoh passed away as well. Now, I know that's a really quick synopsis of what's going on. I'm going to fast forward even more again to set the stage. So God raises up Moses, right, to deliver his people out of Egypt. They wind up going to Mount Sinai. They're given the law, the Ten Commandments, and other law. And God travels with them in a cloud and leads them, is leading them to the Promised Land. And unfortunately, though, when we come to Numbers, we see that, and we see this a little bit in Exodus, the people of God, Israel, rebels against God in various ways, and they murmur against God for bringing them out of slavery in Egypt. Leviticus, again, it gives us all the details of various sacrifices and rituals that God gives them to do for sin, all that, right? But the book of Numbers picks up the story of the Israelites in the wilderness. And actually in the Hebrew Old Testament, the name for Numbers is actually the Hebrew word translated for wilderness. That's what it's describing. In the our English Bibles, it's Numbers because the people are numbered. The Israelites are numbered. You see that through several places. But they're in the wilderness during this period of time in Numbers. And one way it's been described is there's two generations really that are described in Numbers. You have the old faithless generation who winds up wandering and dying in the wilderness, and you have the new generation that is led up to right up to the brink of the Promised Land, because that's how Numbers ends, is where they're literally about to enter the Promised Land. So, all right, I know that's a super fast synopsis of Genesis to Numbers, but I think it's helpful to set the stage to understand where we are in the story. So I'm going to highlight a couple of quick events in Numbers. Basically, we could summarize by saying the people complain against God. The people complain against God many, many times in Numbers. Numbers 11, 1 through 15, they complain. They rebel against God. They're upset. They complain that they basically want to go back to Egypt. Why can't we go back to Egypt? We had food. There was no trouble. Let's go back to Egypt. In Numbers 12, Miriam and Aaron, right? This is Moses' sister and Aaron's his brother, right? Is that right? Yes. Yes. Miriam and Aaron, his brother and sister who speak against him. They're against his leadership. So God has to let them know that Moses is his man. Numbers 13, the people do not listen to Joshua or Caleb's report about the land. They send out spies into the Promised Land, and they say, this is a land flowing with milk and honey. And the other spies say, yeah, it's great, but there's these giants. They're going to defeat us. We can't win. The people complain, and they actually want to stone Moses and Aaron. They threaten to stone Moses and Aaron. Why are you taking us into this land where we're going to be destroyed? In Numbers 16, we see Korah, this individual, and some 250 chiefs, these leaders of the people, they come against Moses and Aaron again, and they want to know why Aaron and the Levites are the only ones who can be priests and do this service to God. And God comes and makes it clear that they are the line of the priests, and Korah is swallowed up in judgment. In Numbers 20, it goes on. This is where the waters at Meribah, where the people complain they don't have any water. And they ask, why has the Lord brought us out to make us die in the wilderness? Again, complaining. Same old thing. I mean, it's just repeated over and over and over in Numbers. That's where Moses strikes the rock twice instead of obeying God, and that's what prohibits Moses from crossing into the Promised Land. And then last, there's several other references, but last, in Numbers 25, it says that the people began to play the harlot with the daughters of Moab, for they invited the people to the sacrifices of their God, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So Israel joined themselves to the Baal of Peor, and the Lord was angry against Israel. This is an interesting text because this is going to come right after the text that we're looking at today. Big picture is that in Numbers, we have this really, really complaining, difficult people that God is leading. And they wander in the wilderness for 40 years because they do not believe the report of the spies, and they rebel and they disobey. They are left to wander in the wilderness until that generation dies off. They're in the south of Israel. And then after that, God begins to lead them up into the Promised Land. And honestly, you really start to wonder, when you're reading Numbers, are these people going to get to the Promised Land? I mean, you really wonder that. Like, there's not a chance. He doles out judgment on them. He does judge and punish them, but he does not abandon them, he doesn't abandon them. It's astonishing how gracious he is with them throughout this period of time. And he helps them defeat their enemies. This is, again, setting the stage for the text we're about to look at. King Sihon of the Amorites is defeated. So the Israelites are down here in the wilderness. God starts to bring them up here through, Promised Land is up here. I know this is exactly to scale, all right? Coming up here. He comes up here, they defeat Sihon, king of the Amorites, and then Og, king of Bashan, are up here. Jericho's right here. We have the Jordan River. They're about to cross in. And then we have, again, where our text is going to come in, the king of Moab, of the Moabites. Right around here, right before they cross in. Balak, the king of Moab, sees that Israel is prevailing against these kings around him. Israel is not even knocking on the door of Moab, by the way. They're going to cross the Jordan and go into the Promised Land. But Balak, he gets concerned. He sees Israel prevailing against his neighbors, and he's afraid they're going to have an advantage over him. So he calls in Balaam, the son of Beor, who is a pagan prophet, but that Yahweh has actually spoken to. Yahweh comes and speaks to him, but he's a pagan prophet. What text did I say? Who's got Numbers 22, 1 through something? Read that one.
Then the sons of Israel journeyed on and camped in the plains of Moab beyond the Jordan, opposite Jericho. Now Balak, the son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. So Moab, in great fear of the people, for they were numerous, and Moab was in dread of the sons of Israel. Moab said to the elders of Midian, "Now this horde will eat up all that is around us, as the ox eats up the grass of the field." And Balak, the son of Zippor, was king of Moab at that time. So he sent messengers to Balaam, the son of Beor, at Pethor, which is near the Euphrates River, in the land of the sons of the people, to call for him, saying, "Behold, a people came out of Egypt. Behold, they have covered the surface of the land. Now they are living opposite me. Now, therefore, please come, curse them, curse this people for me, since they are too mighty for me. Perhaps I will be able to defeat them and drive them out of the land. For I know that he whom you bless is blessed, and he whom you curse is cursed." So the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian left with the feast for divination in their hands, and they came to Balaam and repeated Balak's words to him. And they said to him, "Spend the night here, and I will bring word back to you, just as the Lord may speak to me." And the leaders of Moab stayed with Balaam. Then God came to Balaam and said, "Who are these men with you?" Balaam said to God, "Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab, sent word to me. Behold, there is a people who came out of Egypt, and they cover the surface of the land. Now come, curse them for me. Perhaps I will be able to defeat them, to fight against them, and drive them out." But God said to Balaam, "Do not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they are blessed."
So again, that's the summary of what's going on. That sets the stage for everything that's going on right now. People of Israel, they're moving up into the plains of Moab. They're north of Moab. The king of Moab's concerned. Balak calls this prophet, medicine man, to come out and put a curse on them. So Balaam does go with them. There's the story of the donkey and the angel. We're going to skip that. But it's pretty obvious that Balaam, he's not a good dude, right? God speaks to him, and he delivers the word of the Lord here. He's not an honorable man, not a righteous man. He actually winds up getting killed later through judgment, the judgment of God. Really negative picture of Balaam in 2 Peter, and I think it's Jude as well. But anyway, skipping that, he comes to start blessing them, and in Numbers 23:7, I think that's you, Miss Marilyn. You have Numbers 23:7 through 11, 7 through 11.
And Balaam took up this discourse and said, "From Aram to Balak has brought me the king of Moab from the eastern mountains. Come, curse Jacob for me, and come, denounce Israel. How can I curse whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced? For from the top of the crags I see him, from the hills I behold him. Behold, a people dwelling alone and not counting itself among the nations. Who
it's kind of comical with Balak that he gets upset. He's like, what are you doing? I'm bringing all this silver and stuff to you. I want you to curse them, and you're blessing this people. What's the deal? It gets more comical, but he says, he's giving a blessing. He's saying, I can't curse this people. And then it moves on to, what was the next text? 24, 1 through, I think it was you, Randy, 24, 1 through 10.
When Balaam saw that it pleased the Lord to bless Israel, he did not go as at other times to seek omens, but he set his face toward the wilderness. And Balaam lifted up his eyes and saw Israel camping tribe by tribe. And the Spirit of God came upon him. And he took up his discourse and said, the oracle of Balaam, the son of Beor, and the oracle of the man whose eye is open, the oracle of him who hears the words of God, who sees the vision of the Almighty, falling down, yet having his eyes uncovered. How fair are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings, O Israel, like valleys that stretch out, like gardens beside the river, like aloes planted by the Lord, like cedars beside the waters. Water shall flow from his buckets, and his seed shall be by many waters, and his king shall be higher than Agag, and his kingdom shall be exalted. God brings him out of Egypt. He is for him like the horns of the wild ox. He shall devour the nations who are his adversaries, and shall crush their bones in pieces, and shatter them with his arrows. He couches, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who dares rouse him? Blessed is everyone who blesses you, and cursed is everyone who curses you. Then Balak's anger burned against Balaam, and he struck his hands together. And Balak said to Balaam, I called you to curse my enemies, but behold, you have persisted in blessing them these 3 times.
And again, it's just comical. It's like Balak doesn't get it after multiple times. He tells him multiple times, go stand over here. No, then go stand on this mountain. Look at the people. Curse them. And after 3 times, it's the same thing. So Balak, not too bright, figuring out what was going to happen there. But key thing noticing in that text, Numbers 24:9, he crouches, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who dares rouse him? Blessed, this is Balaam speaking, blessed is everyone who blesses you, and cursed is everyone who curses you. That phrase, that text, that is the promise made to Abraham, that Balaam is saying again to the people of Israel. Exact same language from Genesis 12:3 that we covered several weeks ago. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse you, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. He's reflecting that blessing that God has given to Abraham and is saying is going to be on this people group. And eventually who all the nations of the earth will be blessed from. So God won't allow this pagan prophet to curse Israel because they are blessed by God. It's interesting. And you just imagine the scene where Balaam and Balak they're standing, on the mountain, they're looking, and I think they actually moved closer to the people in this last time that Balaam is talking, but God's working out his plan of redemption through this people, and no matter what prophecies they try to conjure up, whatever divination they try and conjure up, the enemies of Israel, they are not going to stop them from going into the promised land. Balak cannot and will not stop Yahweh's plans, and he can't stop the blessing that's on Abraham or the descendants of Abraham. So that's, again, important background that leads us up to the text that we're in, I think. So Numbers 24:15 through 24 says this. This is the last time that Balaam speaks and offers this last blessing. And he took up his discourse and said, the oracle of Balaam, the son of Beor, and the oracle of the man whose eye is open, the oracle of him who hears the words of God and knows the knowledge of the Most High, who sees the vision of the Almighty, falling down yet having his eyes uncovered. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come forth from Jacob, and a scepter shall rise from Israel, and shall crush through the forehead of Moab, and tear down all the sons of Sheth. And Edom shall be a possession. Seir, its enemies, also shall be a possession, while Israel performs valiantly. One from Jacob shall have dominion, and shall destroy the remnant from the city. And he looked at Amalek, and took up his discourse, and said, Amalek was the first of the nations, but his end shall be destruction. And he looked at the Kenite and took up his discourse and said, your dwelling place is enduring, and your nest is set in the cliff. Nevertheless, Cain shall be consumed. How long shall Ashur keep you captive? And he took up his discourse and said, alas, who can live except God has ordained it? But the ships shall come from the coast of Kittim, and they shall afflict Ashur and shall afflict Eber. They also shall come to destruction. I know that's a long text. I know it's a lot of reading this morning, but I think all this helps us set the stage for Numbers 24:17 is the specific messianic text. Numbers 24:17. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come forth from Jacob. A scepter shall rise from Israel. The first thing with our text is that this text, just like we saw that Balaam reflects that blessing in Genesis 12, this text reflects the promise made in Genesis 49:10. That's what we just looked at, about the scepter rising from Judah. So this text echoes the promise made in Genesis 49:10 about a king that will come from Israel. And notice the language that Balaam says, I see him and I behold him. So the same thing that we've brought up with every messianic text, there is a specific man that Balaam sees coming in the future. It's a specific individual. Balaam sees him coming in the future. Remember Genesis 49:10. Again, we just looked at last week. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. And we see that same language here in Numbers about a scepter. We talked about that. The scepter symbolizes authority and rule. It's what the king holds. The other symbol of this coming king, which is interesting, is a star. A star shall come forth from Jacob. It's interesting, too, because I thought this might be where the Star of David comes from. You know, the Star of David. It seems kind of an obvious inference from that text. Apparently, that's not where the Star of David comes from Numbers 24:17 at all, from my limited research. Anyway, just a side note, interesting. A king's prophesied to come out of Israel. This text isn't concerned about which tribe the king will come from. Like in Genesis 49, we see it's the tribe of Judah, right? That's what we talked about last week. This text, it's almost more like family business, right? It's Jacob talking to his sons. It's all the sons there, the various tribes. Here, it's more contrasting Israel and the surrounding nations. It's this text contrasting Israel and the surrounding nations. The focus is not about which tribe the king will come from, but it still reflects the similar promise that there's this ruler that is going to come out of Israel. And part of the reason that we know this is messianic, or we can be very confident it's messianic, is because the Numbers text here, it echoes that Genesis text. We know the Genesis text is messianic, Genesis 49:10. And we'll see another reason as well, but that's part of how we know it's messianic here. So the second thing, we see a ruler coming, similar to last week, right? Ruler's coming. The second thing is this mighty king is going to completely destroy the enemies of Israel. Now, I will say some of the stuff we're talking about is a little redundant, similar to what we talked about last week, but I think we still need to cover it because this is a messianic text. Numbers 24:17, the second part of 17, a scepter shall rise from Israel and shall crush through the forehead of Moab and tear down all the sons of Sheth. Edom shall be a possession. Seir, its enemies, also will be a possession, while Israel performs valiantly. One from Jacob shall have dominion and will destroy the remnant from the city. So I think this is comical because, Balaam and Balak, Balaam's the bad prophet, right? Balak is the Moabite king. He's telling them, he's literally, loads of silver and stuff. Come, curse them. And Balaam winds up prophesying the defeat of Moab to the Moabite king to his face, which is not at all what the Moabite king was planning to have done. I just think that is so comical. But there's clear language in this part of the passage that are about the king dominating his enemies. These enemies of Israel, Moab, Edom, Seir seems to be another name for Edom. It was south of Israel. These people, these enemies of Israel, are going to be completely dominated through this king. We also see it's not just these two that are mentioned here. You see you see this language where the king is going to come and take away Moab and Edom. He's going to subject them to his rule. He's going to defeat them, dominate them. The last part of the passage, Balaam says this. He looked at Amalek. This is another enemy right outside of Israel, or the nation, or the land that Israel is going to inhabit. Big-time enemy of Israel. He looked at Amalek and took up his discourse and said, Amalek was the first of the nations, but his end shall be destruction. And he looked at the Kenite and took up his discourse and said, the Kenites, this seems to be who Moses' father-in-law was descended from. And there were people that actually, they weren't at war or enemies of Israel, but they kind of stayed close to them. But they didn't like fully assimilate in. They were separated by some distance, but they were kind of close. All right, so, but here he says, behold, look at the Kenite, and took up his discourse and said, your dwelling place is enduring, and your nest is set in the cliff. Nevertheless, Cain, this is referencing the same people, the Kenites, will be consumed. And it's interesting there because it's this people group that's close to Israel, not an enemy, but close to Israel, but not Israel, that is going to be destroyed as well. They're not gonna make it during this time. How long will Ashur keep you alive? It's probably reference to a tribe that attacks them. Verse 23, then he took up his discourse and said, alas, who can live except God has ordained it? But ships shall come from the coast of Kittim, and they shall afflict Ashur and will afflict Eber, so they also will come to destruction. So the idea, what we have going on here, we have, again, a prophecy of a ruler coming from Israel. We have a mighty ruler coming from Israel. He is going to defeat enemies of Israel, specifically referenced Moab and Edom. But additionally, we have all of these other nations being destroyed. All of these other nations around them being destroyed. And it's not exactly clear how that's going to be accomplished, whether that's by this king that comes forth or by another means. Not exactly sure. But regardless of what happens there, Israel will be safe. Who's left standing in this? Israel. Israel is left standing. That's part of the point of the prophecy. Israel is blessed. Don't miss that. All that we talked about with the coming of the seed of the woman and with Abraham and this pronouncement of blessing on his descendants, that is front and center here in these couple chapters that we're looking at. Israel is blessed. They are the people of God. He's working out his promise to Abraham. This phrase in verse 23, where it says he took up his discourse and said, alas, who can live except God has ordained it? The ESV renders it, he took up his discourse and said, alas, who shall live when God does this? That could be eschatological language, meaning pointing to the end. It could be saying all that is being talked about here is this mega future event at the end times when God comes to bring judgment on the nations. That could be what it's talking about. Not 100% sure, but it's definitely forward-looking, and it predicts the downfall of essentially every nation, every enemy of Israel. Israel, again, is the last one standing. So, there's all of the background that we have. There's all the background. So who and what is all of this talking about? Who and what is this talking about? Well, just like we talked about in Genesis 49:10, this seems to be in part fulfilled by David. This is in part fulfilled by David, seemingly. Can you read 2 Samuel 8, 1 through 15? You're my 2 Samuel man.
Now after this, it came about that David defeated the Philistines and subdued them. And David took control of the chief city from the hand of the Philistines. He defeated Moab and measured them with a line, making them lie down on the ground. And he measured 2 lines to put to death, and 1 full line to keep alive. And the Moabites became servants to David for a year. Then David defeated Hadadezer, the son of Rehob, king of
Don't you love these passages in the Old Testament? That's why I'm getting y'all to read them, right? That way you can't make fun of the way I pronounce it, like you do everything else, you know? So David conquers all these enemies, and specifically references some. Moab and Edom are referenced in that passage that he just said, as well as the Philistines, all these areas surrounding Israel. So David, he subjects these peoples, these enemies, and it does seem that he partially fulfills this prophecy, just like we talked about in Genesis 49:10, where David's a part of that prophecy. He's one of the kings that's in that line that Christ is going to come from. And I would say this, is that don't miss the prophecy here. Don't miss that we just kind of gloss over and buzz through. Numbers, the book of Numbers is written around 1400 BC, right? So right here on our timeline. Time's going that way. Numbers is written around 1400 BC. David lives and is, reigning in Israel somewhere around 1000 BC, all right? 1400, 1000. So this prophecy in Numbers is hundreds of years prior to David ascending to the throne, prior to him conquering all his enemies, but it's prophesied that this is going to happen from a ruler, and that the people groups that are going to be conquered are named by name hundreds of years before it actually happens. That's incredible. I don't want us to miss that because we just kind of move through it so fast. So the prophecy is fulfilled in a sense. God predicted it. It actually happens. It's real history. You can't make up those things happening. The question is it completely or only fulfilled in and with David? It's interesting because in Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah, he prophesies judgment against Moab as well. All right, so David, he conquers Moab, conquers these people around 1000 BC. Jeremiah comes on the scene, and he is prophesying judgment against Moab and the Ammonites as well later in Jeremiah 48. And he uses the same language and some of the imagery that comes from Numbers 24. So he's pulling from some of that Numbers prophecy, and he's using some of the same language as well. For instance, in verse 45 in Jeremiah 48, in speaking of judgment that will come, he says, "It has devoured the forehead of Moab." Same exact language that is used in our text, where the ruler is going to come and crush the forehead of Moab. Same language. So he's talking about a future event, right? So Numbers, David, Jeremiah. Jeremiah's like 500 BC. So he's talking about a future event, drawing on that language. So we don't know for certain if that means that text in Numbers, because of Jeremiah's reference, if that's him pointing to a future eschatological event, an end times event, the end of the age. It's possible, or he could just be drawing on that language and using it for his own purposes. I don't know. I think it's interesting. That's why I bring it up. Regardless of the Jeremiah business, whether or not that helps build the case for a future event, and that being the reason it's messianic, the New Testament helps us clearly understand what this passage is about in Numbers 24:17. Does anyone have a guess where in the New Testament our text might be referenced or alluded to? Any guesses?
Revelation?
Yes. Good guess. Any other guesses? No? Okay. There's three, possibly four. The first one's Matthew 2:2, possibly. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." This is a text that could be alluding to that, but might not be. One of the arguments against this being alluding to the Numbers text is that Matthew quotes several other Old Testament passages when he's talking about the Messiah, when he quotes messianic texts. But here he doesn't quote Numbers. It just says the star, right? So it could be referencing that. It might not be. It's possible. 2 Peter 1:19 says, "So we have the prophetic word made more sure, to which you do well to pay attention, as to a lamp shining in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star arises in your hearts. So that seems to be a very clear reference to our Numbers passage. The difficult part of this passage here in 2 Peter is that it says the morning star will arise in your hearts. That's a difficult thing it's difficult to understand what exactly is being said. It could be that, because he's talking about the prophetic word and being made sure of the prophetic word, being able to trust in what God has spoken. It could be that when the day that 2 Peter 1:19 mentions, when the day dawns, when Christ comes back, and the morning star rises in your heart, a reference to that. When Christ comes back, we will see that it is true. We won't have a need for that prophetic word. Could be referencing that in this passage. But this, again, does seem to be a clear reference to our Numbers passage. Don't worry, it gets better, all right? Hang in there. Hang in there. Revelation 2:28, this is Jesus' letter to the church of Thyatira. And he says some other stuff. And in verse 26 of Revelation 2, he says, "He who overcomes," this is Jesus speaking, "he who overcomes and he who keeps my deeds until the end, to him I will give authority over the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron, as the vessels of the potter are broken to pieces, as I also have received authority from my Father. And I will give him the morning star." It's an interesting reference. Because again, this is Jesus talking, and he's talking about giving the morning star to these individuals that have overcome in the church. Interesting reference. Revelation 22:16, the last one, and we're about to close. Revelation 22:16, Jesus says this at the very end, almost the very end of Revelation. "I, Jesus, have sent my angel to testify to you these things for the churches. I am the root and the descendant of David, the bright morning star." So it seems pretty clear from that Jesus is the star, pretty obvious, and that this reference in Revelation 2:28 that he gives them the morning star, that this has something to do with communing with, dwelling with Jesus. That's what happens after those overcome in Revelation. They're going to be with Jesus. But Jesus is the morning star, the bright morning star, according to Revelation 22:16. That is a reference, again, to Numbers. That is a reference to Numbers 24:17, the passage that we were just looking at. So the star from Jacob, the scepter from Israel, again, is the Messiah from this New Testament reference, also because we see it referencing Genesis 49:12, which is also messianic. And Jesus is the Messiah, Jesus Christ, the anointed one. There's no question, I don't think, that Numbers 24:17 is predicting the Messiah again, a mighty king that is going to come. The star reference seems to be related to the second coming. It seems to be a symbol for the second coming of Christ. It's a symbol associated with him coming again. So this text in Numbers predicts the second coming of Jesus when, because what do we see? This ruler that's coming, it's predicted, he's going to dominate the nations. That is what this is predicting. Christ coming and dominating the nations. We think about Gog and Magog. It doesn't reference them, but we think about them in Ezekiel 38 and 39 and also in Revelation 20. They're basically the rulers of the earth who mass the people against God to come war with the Lamb, right? We have that kind of idea, but this ruler is going to come and crush all of the enemies of God's people. And Israel, or the spiritual Israel, his people, are going to be the only ones that are left standing. Again, this corresponds with Psalm 2 in that messianic text. So I know that's a lot, and I know some of it's redundant from the passage we talked about last week, but I think, again, it's pretty clear from Revelation 22:16. I've got one more quick question before we close. I know we're going. Is there any other place that the morning star is referenced in Scripture you can think of?
Isaiah 14.
That's right. Do you know who it's referencing in that? Okay, you do know who that's referencing?
Lucifer.
That's right. Yeah. Lucifer is referenced as the morning star in Isaiah. It's 14:12, I think. Is that right? I think it's 14:12. I think that's one of the reasons, in the KJV it's translated, they say Lucifer, the one of the dawn or something, and they don't translate it as a morning star, and I think that's one of the arguments they use, KJV onlyness, that we shouldn't translate it that way. I would just say in passing that Lucifer may be referenced as the morning star, But it's talking about his grandeur, and he's talking about how he was this exalted being, but that he fell because he rebelled against God. We shouldn't be concerned that the scripture uses these two phrases to refer to Jesus and Satan, because where else do we see that? The lion.
It refers to it in Job 38, but it's morning stars and it's talking about creation.
Yeah, I don't think that one's referencing Lucifer or Jesus. I don't think. I'll have to double check that one.
That one actually says morning stars.
Yeah, so, I mean, I just thought it's interesting that you're saying, if it has something to do with, the second coming or whatever, and then this has to do with creation, it would kind of mirror each other.
Interesting. Yeah, that one I'm not familiar with. I'm going to look at that one. All right, I know, I'm sorry, I'm rambling on. But the point is, Christ and Satan are also described as a lion, right? There's a positive attribute of the lion, courageous and bold. It's ascribed to Jesus, the lion in the tribe of Judah. There's also the negative aspect of a lion, the devourer, right? Satan's an adversary or devourer, seeking to devour someone in 1 Peter. So that shouldn't bother us. But anyway, I just want to mention that. Probably too long of a side rabbit trail. But any questions before we close? No? Go. Then we'll be done. Maybe you should be dismissed while Ben's asking it.
Just a comment, where you're talking about in 2 Peter, where it says, and so we have a prophetic word made more sure to which you do well to pay attention to. I just think it's cool that's what we're doing here, and that we're going back through and seeing all these examples of Christ in the Old Testament, because that's where so many religions get it wrong, and that's where they fall short of it. So I just appreciate you going through all these examples and teaching us about it.
Yeah, sure thing. Appreciate it, man. Yeah, it is sad, like when you think of the Jewish nation in general, right? Like they don't accept the New Testament revelation, and it so clearly helps to unpack what is already present in the Old Testament text, like what we've been going through. It's unfortunate, but anyway, I think we're dismissed before I get run off the stage, and we'll continue next week.